let's move on to the next part of the Five Friday feedback, if you don't mind.
Please,
And this
let's do
time,
it.
since we're talking a lot about philosophy in here, I thought we had a few different viewer mailbags, but none of them really spoke to Dominic this week. So he said, Chris, like there are some in here that we could use, but they're just not getting specific enough. So I decided, hey, how about I use a parable? And what a parable is it's a teaching story, much like the story of the fisherman that I just told. So we're going to tell another one. This parable may be fake lore. And what fake lore means is it's inauthentic folklore presented as tradition. So this was told by the Buddha, but it was told with dogs. So now this is a different story. And I like the version of the two wolves. And it's a Cherokee story, if it's actually a Cherokee story. So I'm going to tell you the story and then we're going to riff on it and see where it goes from here. So a young boy came to his grandfather filled with anger at another boy who had done him an injustice. The old grandfather said to his grandson, "Let me tell you a story. I too at times have felt great hate for those who have taken so much with no sorrow for what they have done. But hate wears you down. Hate does not hurt your enemy. Hate is like taking poison and wishing your enemy would die. I have struggled with these feelings many times. It is as if I have two wolves inside of me. One wolf is good and does not harm. He lives in harmony with all around him and does not take offense when no offense is intended. He will only fight when it is right to do so and in the right way. But the other wolf is full of anger. The littlest things will send him into a fit of temper. He fights everyone all the time for no reason. He cannot think because his anger and hate are so great. It is helpless anger because his anger will change nothing. Sometimes it is hard to live with these two wolves inside of me because both of these wolves try to dominate my spirit." The boy then looked intently at his grandfather in his eyes and asked, "Which wolf will win, grandfather?" The grandfather smiled and said, "The one I feed."
I love a good story time. Let me tell you, that was good. That was good. I like it.
Gather
I like
around
that.
the campfire, children.
Gather around. I was painting a picture in my mind when you were reading it. I was loving it.
So in Buddhism, there's many teachings that you learn about, but a lot of them come down through parables. And the parable in Taoism it's either a story or a question that incites deeper pondering to figure out like what's the true meaning of it. So I say we talk a little bit about it. I'm not going to tell you the meaning that I have to this.
Yeah.
I would like you to tell me what you think the meaning is, because I don't want other people to. And this story is
Influence it.
pretty easy. There are other ones like what's the sound of one hand clapping, like that. That's another one that could be misconstrued in different ways. So I don't want to tell you what I take from this, but what do you get from that?
So I think before I start, I want the listener to just pause the video, pause the stream, pause the podcast, and develop your own thought on the meaning of this parable. I don't want you to hear mine, hear Chris, and then be like, "Oh yeah, I like Dom's or I like Chris's." It's like, no. I want you to think for yourself because it could be different for you, it could be different for me. So pause it, and just think on it. What does that story mean to you, right? And now we're unpaused, hopefully. What I see in this story has a lot, for me at least. It's not the way I am like interpreting it. It has to do with like your choices on a day-to-day aspect, right? It's funny actually, because my win of the week is kind of tied into this, unrelated. For me, it's the habits you do or the person you become, right? And the thoughts you have they influence your decisions. There was this beautiful quote. I'm going to try and remember it. It was like, thoughts are like waves. You can't stop the waves from coming. You can't stop the thoughts from coming, but you can choose which ones to focus on. And it's very important that you choose the correct thoughts to focus on, right? Choose the correct wolf to feed. Because the more you feed that specific one, the more thoughts you choose to focus on, that's the direction you're going to go, right? My goal last week, or the beginning of the week, right? I told myself, I said, you know what? This week, I'm not going to have negative thoughts. I'm not going to have it. Not against myself, not against others, not against anything, And like Chris has been teaching me, in stoicism, right? You know, don't let people hear you're complaining, but most importantly, don't let yourself hear yourself complain, right? For me, in this two wolf story, the one you focus on is the one you become. And you might say, it's just this one time. Just this one time, I'm going to feed that dark wolf. You know, this guy cut me off in traffic, man. I'm going to lay on the horn. Look at him. He cut me off. He's totally in the wrong. Now you're moving in that direction, and that's the wolf you want to feed, then that's the wolf you become, you know? Or you could say, you know what? He cut me off. He was in the wrong. It is what it is. That's fine. It's fine. I think this talks a lot about the day by day, how the day by day decisions can affect your whole life. Because if you just, it's just this one time I'm going to lay on the horn. It's just this one time I'm going to feed this wolf, right? How many times before it's too much, you know? That's an interesting one, though. That's an interesting one. But yeah, going back to my waves analogy, you know, we can't stop the waves from coming, but we can choose which ones to focus on. The ones we focus on and the thoughts we have correlate to the actions we do. And what we do is who we end up becoming. So it's so important to start from zero, start from one, start from the small decision, right? How we do anything is how we do everything. Yeah, I don't know. This is an interesting one. This is an interesting story, Chris. I like this one.
Yeah, I really like this story. There's a lot of points in here that when I first heard this, it made a lot of sense to me. I used to deal a lot with anger. I used to have a lot of anger issues.
Mm-hmm.
I don't anymore, and you've known me for about a year now, and I don't think you've ever seen me get angry because
No.
I don't have it anymore.
No.
I've starved that wolf in me.
Yeah.
There's an old Buddhist saying that hatred is holding a hot coal and wishing that your enemy was burned. So by holding on to anger, by holding on to that hatred, when I first heard that, I was like, oh my God, like I get it. Like it's not hurting the other person when I'm mad at them. When I like cuss out the guy that when I cuss him out and like scream in my car when someone cuts me off, that's not doing anything to them. That's just stressing myself out. It's stressing out my wife. It's stressing out my dogs. It's stressing out everyone. And for no fucking reason. Like what's going to happen? Even if I decided like I'm going to go and fight this person, then what? I go to jail. Like think about the second and third order consequences. And you know, I know I talk a lot about Taoism on the podcast. And when I first heard this, it made me think a lot about Taoism, which is an offshoot of Buddhism, of finding the middle way. And inside of all of us, there are these two extremes, the light and the dark. And maybe for some people, you're going to feed both of those at different times. And that's okay because different situations calls for dark and some situations call for good. But too many people, they live in the darkness all the time. And I think of it kind of like a NOS for a car, right? You want to be driving your car 80% in the positive, 80% in the good light. But every so often, you want to have that negative, that NOS. You want to have that darkness that you can turn on every so often and use. But if you only use that NOS, you're going to blow up your engine.
Yeah.
And I've used this in my own self in that I have both these spirits, both these poles inside of me, and we all do. And they're both trying to corrupt you to their own way. And who's to say what is good and what is bad? Corruption is corruption. Whatever way you go could be correct or could be incorrect. But when I think about this, it just always brings me back to finding what is the middle way for the solution. Because I've used times in my life where I try to stay in the positive, where I try to stay, I want to do this for the good of people, to help people, because it brings me joy, because it brings other people joy, because I'm good at it. But there's also times I need to turn on that dark energy and say, I want to build this company because other people told me that I was going to fail. Because I was told when I was young that I'm too stupid to do this kind of stuff. And I don't want to stay in that all the time. But every so often, it's good to turn that on when you're feeling weak, when you're feeling sore. And it's just kind of like that cookie jar analogy that David Goggins talks about, having that cookie jar that you can dig into. Now, you don't live in that cookie jar, but you know that it's there.
And the analogy that Chris is referencing from David Goggins, he talks about the cookie jar, right? You know, when you were younger, your mom or grandma might have had a jar full of cookies, right? You reach your hand in there, you might get an oatmeal raisin, you might get a peanut butter, chocolate, might get an Oreo, you know, you don't know what you're going to get, right? The analogy is basically like in that cookie jar, you remember where people said you weren't smart enough, where you were doubted, where no one believed in you, where those mornings where no one saw you, no one was around. You could have skipped a workout, but you didn't. When you put in that extra rep, when no one was looking, that's within the cookie jar. So when you have those moments of, damn, dude, I don't know if I can do this, man. I don't know if I can continue. You reach into the cookie jar and be like, oh, remember when this person said you couldn't build this company? And what happened? You built it. You built it and it is successful. Right? So it's that level of, that's kind of like the idea around the cookie jar analogy. So powerful. And I love what you were talking about, Chris, about you live 80% in the green. That 20%, just in case, when you need it, right? I know for me, like, I live a peaceful life, I'm a pretty happy guy, but I still have that 20%, right? And when I go to the gym, that's when he comes out, right? That's when I see that weight, I'm like, up it more to a safe limit. I'm not going to kill myself. But just 600 pounds on the bench press just crushes me. No, I'm not getting crazy. But I think it's important. And I want to get your take on this. I think it's important to not let that 20% just sit all the time. You got to have an avenue to release that. What are your thoughts on that? In a healthy way. I'm not talking about like beating someone up every third Tuesday of the month. I'm talking about a healthy way to like that. You know what I'm saying?
I agree. And it depends on how you want to frame it. Again, I'll go back to the thing that separates humans from everyone else is that we have the ability to tell stories. Mm-hmm. And it's that story that you're telling yourself. When I tell myself the story of like, oh, Chris, you're never going to succeed at this thing, I could tell myself the story that person hated me, or I could tell myself the story that person was genuinely trying to protect me from going out on my own and screwing up my life. Yeah. When someone called me stupid when I was younger, it's because they didn't know any better. They thought like, if I don't tell this kid that he's not going to amount to anything, that he might go through his whole life thinking that he's going to be worth something and not get there. Never tell a kid that they're stupid, by the way.
No, never. That's
fucked me up for a really long time.
Yeah.
But like,
yeah. And it's weird. Life is so weird in that regard because it's like, you should never ever say something so fucked up like that to a kid. Never. But at the same time, it made you into the great man that you are today. I'm not advocating for it, but it's interesting how you can take a bad situation and turn it into a fuel. You can use anything for fuel to really build yourself up. And that's what you did.
And it's the story I told myself, right? Is because I told myself the right story. I could have told myself the story that, yes, I am an idiot. That person's right. Or I can tell myself the story that, you're right. I don't understand things quickly. It does take me a really long time. Mm-hmm. But instead of tying my identity to being the smartest person in the room the fastest, I tied my identity to being the person that is the learner. I told myself the story that I am someone who can learn. And I will continue to keep on putting in the reps until I figure it out. And then I'm better than you. And that was my drive for so long, to prove not only to everyone else, but to prove to myself that I was better than other people. And that served me for a long time. And it was a few weeks ago that I told you that it was no longer serving me. And now I'm having to change a lot of that. And it's tough. It's really tough. But you have to look at that and ask yourself, like, are these qualities, are these thoughts, is feeding this wolf serving me? Or should I feed the other wolf? Because whatever wolf you choose to feed, you're giving that more power to defeat the other wolf.
Yeah. Yeah.
In all of life. And there's another thought in Taoism, and I'm so sorry, I can't remember the word it is. It's a Chinese word, but it's basically, in life, there is the path that we're supposed to take. And we don't know what the path is supposed to be. And not until we've gone through it can we look back and say, oh, that's why this all happened. It happened like this and this and this, even though at the worst moments I fought against it. It all led me to right here at this moment. And now I understand. So whenever I'm coming up against those moments of like, God, I don't want this to be, this is so tough. I please don't let this happen. If I think on a wider perspective and try to move this story 10 years into the future, I'll look back on this moment that might be one of the hardest moments of my life and be like, thank God I went through that. It was really, really tough in the moment, but now I'm stronger for it. So I'll get a little So I studied psychology, and I never had any mental health issues growing up. I've had family members who have been depressed, bipolar, schizophrenic, all those types of things. I was very blessed, and that I just had anger issues, which, not too big of a deal, I guess, because I'm a man, and in being a man, it's acceptable that for me to have anger issues. Like no one bats an eye at that. And when I was in psychology and we would learn about people who have major depressive episodes, I could just never relate. I never understood. I was like, why do you have anxiety? Why do you have all this stuff? I remember having a girl who I worked with who had like major anxiety issues. I couldn't show up to work because of her anxiety. And I'd be like, how weak are you? Like, just get over it.
Yeah.
And then when I started my company and after I became financially independent, I, for the first time in my life, experienced depression. I experienced anxiety. And while I never want to go through those emotions again, I don't. The thing that really helped me get through that was being able to reframe and tell myself a different story and say, how lucky am I that I'm going through these things? And now I finally have an understanding as to what they are. So now when someone else comes to me and says, hey, I have anxiety, I have depression, I'm going through this stuff, I can finally say, I may not know what you're going through, but I understand you. I see you. I have been in a similar place before, and this is what I have gone through to get out of it. Recently, I've told you and I've told the podcast, so I'll say it again. So I'm not like nothing wrong with it. Me and my wife were trying to get pregnant, and we were pregnant, and we had a miscarriage. And hardest thing in my life, one of the hardest things. But even in that moment, my wife and I were able to say, like, there are other people in this world that might not be able to make it through this. But like, how lucky are we that we're able to?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
This video podcast is sponsored by Monzon Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monzonwealth.com.